Hello, my dear friends. Mike Amore welcoming you to our fall 2022 session. Looking forward to working with you grandmasters again. Here is an introductory video to get you set up for this coming Tuesday and Wednesday. We have two groups. Basically, I'm going to be using the blog again that I used to use when we were meeting in person. So you can basically go there. It'll probably be published the Friday before class or Saturday. Get there, you'll have a few days to review what we did the week before, and then also get yourself set for the next week. So the introductory class this time around, in the blog, I listed some important things from each phase of the chess game. So we have the opening, the middle game, and the end game. So in terms of middle game, let's start there first, because it's kind of the most complex phase of the game, I think. I listed the following items. I talked about material and material compensation. Then we talked about space and having control of key squares and files, minor piece imbalances, pawn structure imbalances, king safety, and king location imbalance. And that one, I'm not sure if I've read that in a book before or I just used it myself. What I mean by king location imbalance is, well, if you're castled on the king side and my king is still in the middle, that's an imbalance, right? There's a difference between my position and yours. Well, if a king is sitting in the middle of the board while the other king is castled, you are all strong enough to know that in the back of your minds, you may start thinking about sacrificing something, right? Which would cause a material imbalance, but you're sacrificing, let's say, a pawn in order to maybe open up a file, which would put pressure on that king that's not castled. If you can visualize the kings on opposite sides of the board, then the pawn storm immediately comes into play. You're all familiar with that idea. So we're going to make this a little bit more advanced for ourselves, where we'll start analyzing these games in great detail from set positions. So this is the game between Smyslov and Rudakovsky that we've taught many times at the WCA. So if you're talking about control of key squares and files and diagonals, etc., you would all understand why that knight has been highlighted. That is an outpost square. So one imbalance in this position would be the minor pieces, right? Each team has two rooks and a queen, but there's only one minor piece left for each team. One has a knight, one has a bishop. That is an imbalance. It's a different tool or weapon. In this particular position, the knight is superior to the bishop. And I think you would all know why, based partly on the pawn structure and also based on the fact that you cannot get rid of that knight, right? So this is just an example of showing what I listed in the blog, because when you come to class Tuesday and Wednesday, I want to make sure everything that is listed there, you're comfortable with. Space. When you look at a pawn that's advanced from, let's say in this position, from F4 to F5, that creates a whole lot of space behind this pawn chain, right? I'll just highlight these pawns. So all of the space in here pretty much belongs to white. Yes, it is true that the bishop has control of these dark squares here, but it's not easy for the rest of black pieces to get over there. And one feature that causes that is the pawn wedge here. Pawn wedges, unless they're broken, create walls. And those walls cannot be jumped over, except if you have a knight. Now, in this position, the white knight has access to the king side, but you notice the queen and the two rooks do not. So there's a space advantage for white on that side of the board. So this video is all about you just understanding my language. If this is new to you, great. Make sure you're familiar by the time you come to class. My feeling is you all know this stuff already, but I want to put the words in your head again so that you're really prepared. We're going to talk a great deal about pawn structure and king safety. But king safety, we're also going to add the word imbalance. And along with pawn structure, kings can also have an imbalance, and that usually means where they are located. So in the position you're looking at on the screen, there is no king location imbalance. Both kings are castled on the king side. But let's visualize. If the white king were still in the center of the board, then it would be in black's best interest to somehow open the board, especially the center. Now here, being that the center is closed, it might not be that easy to do. But in most positions, if your opponent has not castled, you usually have the opportunity to maybe sack a pawn to open up something to get to that king. If the kings are on opposite sides of the board, I don't have to tell this class about the pawn storm. You already know that. But we want to create the habits of constantly looking for imbalances. You have two bishops, I have two knights. It's in my best interest to outpost the knights or support them. It's in your best interest to make those bishops flourish, usually by opening up lines. Okay? That is a little bit of a middle game conversation. And let me jump for a moment to the following game. Let's take a look at this position right here, which is a very, very sharp middle game. You will notice here, if we did a material count, that again, just like in the Smyslov game, each team has a queen and two rooks. Yet, look a little bit deeper, white only has one minor piece. This strategically is a little bit harder to talk about because there's no pawn cover at all around this king, which leads you to think white sacrificed a whole piece here for this position. Now let's do the pawns real quick. It's 5 for black and 4, it's 6 for white. So white has one pawn for the piece. Is there compensation? The answer is yes, for a lot of reasons. One, this is a terribly weak pawn and it could fall at any moment, right? Number one. But again, just like in the last position, it's not so easy for these pieces here to get over and protect the king, who again has no pawn cover. But you can't play slowly. And it turns out that white had calculated the move rook f6, taking advantage of this bishop, and which is pinned, and it's threatening mate. If you play a random move, that is checkmate, because the bishop is pinned, the rook is protected by the bishop on d2. So white, who was a 2500 plus, saw all this and was met with the move rook to e6. Now, I don't want to analyze this. What is that the best move or not the best move? What I do want to show you is this concept of having compensation and then cashing in, meaning you get your points back, usually gaining material or leaving yourself with a winning endgame or very favorable middle game. What happened here is the rook came off and white was able to pick a piece back. And that was kind of the only way that black could relieve this pressure. And now we have 5 pawns for black and now with 6 for white. So white got the piece back, gave a pawn back in return there, and you can see everything on the board in front of you. However, watch this. This is the game continuation. Very natural to put the rook on the open file. The rook protected the c pawn. Offer of queens to come off. Critical decision. If you take the queens off the board in this position, you are then saying the chance of me checkmating black is virtually 0 from this position unless you get into an endgame. And what do I mean by that? I have a rook and a dark squared bishop, so do you. So even though I have an extra pawn, and by the way, white did trade, even though I have an extra pawn, I'm not winning this game unless I promote one of those pawns, which in the blog says, the WCA definition, any position that you feel the primary goal is to promote a pawn, say that you are in an end game. And that really changes the way that you think. Now, I get arguments sometimes. People say, or students have said to me, hey, Mike, what if I have a queen and you have a queen and there are some pawn wedges near the other king? And yeah, I still need to promote a pawn, but because the queens are on and there's these wedges near the king, then I could still checkmate you without promoting. I would argue back and say, you're not in an end game. You are in a position where there is still checkmating possibilities. Then you cannot just play natural moves that you would do in an end game, like centralize your king. You probably get mated. So again, when you feel the primary goal is to promote, look at this position. This is clearly an end game. I'll leave this as an advanced study for Tuesday and Wednesday if you have the time. White challenged and went into this bishop ending, bishops of same color. And from here, white has a winning end game. Question is, can you win the end game? All right, this is the position I left in the blog. Let me show you one more. And this is from the game between Andrew and Navaneeth on Sunday. And of course, I'm going to be showing a lot of your games here. Here we go. And this is Andrew and Navaneeth. And I'll jump quickly back to the opening. The French defense, and we're going to do this with your games, is a favorite of mine for talking about the opening, because from these simple first two moves, which are here, right? Here's our French. Let's go back to the beginning, right? E4, E6, E4, D5. Do you know how many things can change from this very simple position? White can play an exchange variation. Zero imbalance. Everything is symmetrical. The only advantage is that white has the move. There are some tricks that both teams can play here. So this is not as quiet as it seems, but it's interesting that from the same first two moves, white can play knight c3 and go for what's called the win hour variation, or that would be black's decision actually. And in my view, this is one of the most interesting openings to study in terms of imbalances. Look at this. So each team has moved 6 times. It's one of the rare times in the French where the player with black gives up their dark squared bishop, which is usually the good one, right? They leave this on the board to get this position, which looks like, wow. But look at the imbalances. Pawn structure, minor piece configuration. White has 2 bishops. Black only has 1, and it's not that great right now. But look deeper. There are 2 pawn wedges on the board, and possibly a third. If that were to happen, and those 3 wedges were able to stabilize and stay stabilized, is that going to help or hurt the 2 bishops for white? You have to really evaluate this. And you also remember me talking about control of key lines and diagonals. Well, I'm totally making this up. Let's say you push this here and black plays here and white plays here. Okay, I'm not saying this is theory. I just put this on the board. You all know about this. This is an unopposed bishop. Yes, there are 3 lines or 3 wedges here, as I mentioned, right? There they are. And if those 3 pawns stay locked on dark squares, this bishop's bad, right? But what if the bishop comes here on this unopposed diagonal. And you may notice me, by the way, looking down to the right during this video. It's only because that's where I see my face, and I'm not used to looking at a camera and chatting. I prefer to look at someone's face, even my own. Whew. Anyway, so you see this? This is worth a lot. Okay, enough jabber. When you come to class, I want you to be prepared to talk to me about an opening line that you're having trouble with, because I'm going to give each of you an 8-week-long assignment to work on an individual opening for yourself. We can't do it for the class. There's too many different openings being played. But let me just show you one thing. This is from the game with Andrew and Navaneeth. I think the computer had this as somewhat equal, a little bit favorable for white, but not important. Nothing I tell you, nothing I teach you, or nothing you read in a book or magazine or video, nothing's going to help you if you don't see tactics. When you miss a tactic in a game, you could be in big, big trouble. Let me show you the conclusion of this game that Navaneeth actually won. Put his rook here. Andrew traded. And Andrew's basically saying to Navaneeth, I have the only long-range minor piece. I have slightly better pawn structure because I have 2 islands, you have 3. I have an advantage. And the game is pretty much even here for humans. King drops back, centralizes the queen, connects his rooks. All looks good. Ah, there's the knight in the middle of the board. Bishop retreats. Queen attacks the B pawn, and the queen blocks. And this is actually a little bit of what Andrew thought was a trap, because the queen is not only offering a trade, but she is also pinning the piece that's protecting the knight. And I think Andrew missed something here. Navaneeth, and I'll find out if he saw this or not during the game, plays queen to D2. Pretty cool move, because he's got all this pressure on F2, and at the same time, it looks like he hung his knight, which he took. The problem is this pawn, yeah, it's pinned by the queen, but I think what Andrew missed was this move, which just completely shatters his dreams here, because the queen has to move off that diagonal. So the rook is going to hang. So he did whatever he could. He took another pawn, and they came off, and he moved his queen. And it turns out he didn't have enough compensation being down the exchange. As a matter of fact, he lost very quickly. The B pawn came off. Navaneeth rightly got the rooks off, but he missed this check. And there's a back rank problem here. Okay. We're going to look at all 3 phases of the game. I have to stop looking at myself. We're going to look at all 3 phases of the game. We're going to have each of you pick an opening line for the 8 weeks that you want to research, and we're going to talk about how to research that line. Our middle game set position analysis will be worked on again, and of course, end game positions that we're going to learn how to win, okay, and study. Looking forward to seeing you all again. All right, I'll see you next week. Let me stop the share. Have a nice weekend, everybody.